Hi, friends. Today I want to teach you that when you read a bunch of books across a series, sometimes you'll notice things about the character that are the same in book after book. So, in my other lessons, we've been reading Days with Frog and Toad. On Epic, we have been reading Frog and Toad Are Friends. So, we're going to listen to a chapter of Frog and Toad Are Friends that you read by yourself. And then we're going to take a look at Days with Frog and Toad. And while you're listening to those stories, we are going to be looking at how Frog and Toad behave the same way no matter what story they are in. Are you ready? Okay, so this one's called The Story, and most of you have already listened to this, and I'm curious what they will do that will be similar compared to what we've seen before.
The Story. One day in summer, Frog was not feeling well. Toad said, "Frog, you are looking quite green." "But I always look green," said Frog. "I am a frog." "Today you look very green, even for a frog," said Toad. "Get into my bed and rest." Toad made Frog a cup of hot tea. Frog drank the tea, and then he said, "Tell me a story while I am resting." "All right," said Toad. "Let me think of a story to tell you." Toad thought and thought, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. "I will go out on the front porch and walk up and down," said Toad. "Perhaps that will help me to think of a story." Toad walked up and down on the porch for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad went into the house and stood on his head. "Why are you standing on your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I stand on my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad stood on his head for a long time, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad poured a glass of water over his head. "Why are you pouring water over your head?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I pour water over my head, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. Toad poured many glasses of water over his head, but he could not think of a story to tell Frog. Then Toad began to bang his head against the wall. "Why are you banging your head against the wall?" asked Frog. "I hope that if I bang my head against the wall hard enough, it will help me to think of a story," said Toad. "I am feeling much better now, Toad," said Frog. "I do not think I need a story any more." "Then you get out of bed and let me get into it," said Toad, "because now I feel terrible." Frog said, "Would you like me to tell you a story, Toad?" "Yes," said Toad, "if you know one." "Once upon a time," said Frog, "there were two good friends, a frog and a toad. The frog was not feeling well. He asked his friend the toad to tell him a story. The toad could not think of a story. He walked up and down on the porch, but he could not think of a story. He stood on his head, but he could not think of a story. He poured water over his head, but he could not think of a story. He banged his head against the wall, but he still could not think of a story. Then the toad did not feel so well, and the frog was feeling better. So the toad went to bed, and the frog got up and told him a story. The end. "How is that, Toad?" said Frog. But Toad did not answer. He had fallen asleep.
All right. So that was interesting to see the different ways they approached telling a story for sure. But now I'm going to read a little bit from Days with Frog and Toad, and we can do some comparisons in just a moment. So we just finished listening to part of a story from the book. Sorry, let me grab it here. Is it Frog and Toad All Year? Frog and Toad Together? Oh my goodness, is it one that I don't even have? Yeah, it's one I don't have. So it's Frog and Toad Are Friends, which is a book that I don't have here at my house. So we're going to start looking at a new story from Days with Frog and Toad. And remember, when readers read a bunch of books across series, they often notice things about the character that are the same in each book. So we are going to be on the lookout for things that are the same in this next story. So when I stop, I'm going to be asking you to tell me what you've noticed about Frog and or Toad that are the same ways they behaved in the other story we read, or even other stories that we have read in this book, so other chapters. So pay close attention into ways Toad is the same, and pay close attention to the way Frog is the same in this next story. The Kite. Frog and Toad went out to fly a kite. They went to a large meadow where the wind was strong. Our kite will fly up and up, said Frog. It will fly all the way up to the top of the sky. Toad, said Frog, I will hold the ball of string. You hold the kite and run. Toad ran across the meadow. He ran as fast as his short legs could carry him. The kite went up in the air, and it fell to the ground with a bump. Toad heard laughter. 3 robins were sitting in a bush. That kite will not fly, said the robins. You might as well give up. Toad ran back to Frog. Frog, said Toad, this kite will not fly. I give up. So, what are you noticing is the same about the way Toad behaves or Frog behaves as you've seen before? I'm going to pause as I listen to you. Okay, so that was interesting to hear the things that you've noticed that are the same about Frog and Toad as compared to the story that we read called Tomorrow or the stories we read on Epic. All right, so we must make a second try, said Frog. Wave the kite over your head. Perhaps that will make it fly. Toad ran back across the meadow. He waved the kite over his head. The kite went up in the air and then fell down with a thud. What a joke, said the robins. That kite will never get off the ground. Toad ran back to Frog. This kite is a joke, he said. It will never get off the ground. We have to make a third try, said Frog. Wave the kite over your head and jump up and down. Perhaps that will make it fly. What are you noticing is always the same about Frog or always the same about Toad? Go ahead and raise your hand and I'm going to call on you. That was so interesting to hear, my friends. Toad ran across the meadow again. He waved the kite over his head. He jumped up and down. The kite went up in the air and crashed down into the grass. That kite is junk, said the robins. Throw it away and go home. Toad ran back to Frog. This kite is junk, he said. I think we should throw it away and go home. Toad, said Frog, we need one more try. Wave the kite over your head, jump up and down, and shout, up, kite, up. Toad ran across the meadow and waved the kite over his head. He jumped up and down. He shouted, up, kite, up. The kite flew into the air. It climbed higher and higher. We did it, cried Toad. Yes, said Frog. If a running try did not work, and a running and a waving try did not work, and a running, waving, and jumping try did not work, I knew that a running, waving, jumping, and shouting try just had to work. The robins flew out of the bush, but they could not fly as high as the kite. Frog and Toad sat and watched their kite. It seemed to be flying way up at the top of the sky. All right, so let's take one more moment where we're going to share. All right, so I noticed that a few of you said Frog isn't letting Toad give up, just like he didn't let Toad push his house chores until tomorrow. So some of you said that Frog is trying to fix the problem. Isn't that the same as we heard in the first story too? It's amazing how the characters are always the same in all of the chapters. So today on Seesaw, I want you to make a recording telling me how the characters stay the same. Give me an example. So you want to say, so you're talking about one character and two things that they have done to show you that they are the same. I'm interested to hear what you have to tell me, friends. We've had two really great examples of Frog and Toad today. And now you're going to tell me how they show the same character. See you next time.